Hello, everybody. Do you like new immigration programs? I do, and I really hope you do, because we have 6 of them to discuss today. So these programs were released just about a month ago, and I have a lot of different thoughts on this, and I hope you do too. I think it's all really, really good news. In some ways, I think that it is like a thank you from the Canadian government to all of these incredible workers who did such an incredible job helping our society get through COVID and all the difficulties with that. On the other hand, I see it as a way of retaining people with Canadian experience who obviously work hard, because I mean people in these professions worked incredibly hard in incredibly difficult circumstances, and boom, increasing French immigration to other provinces in Canada, other than, of course, Quebec. So you've got all of these incredible programs here. You've got a really diverse range of people who qualify for these programs. And if you took a look at the numbers, we've got 90,000 spaces for this. So when we often have that thought when we look at Canada's immigration targets and we say, how is Canada going to get all of these people, right? Because it's over, it's over 1 million over the next 3 years. And we've got, of course, the worldwide shutdown of borders, really, due to COVID. Well, this is how they do it, right? Is being aggressive with, of course, implementing new programs, being concise with the specific types of people who they think will be able to qualify for permanent residency. And it's not only qualifying for permanent residency, but it's also always about integration rates. Who will stay and work? Who will stay forever versus who will have a bit of a harder time integrating into Canadian society. So when we think of those 6 programs, and it is important to think of them as 6 sort of separate programs, even though there are some similarities between them. One of the big issues with this is, of course, caps. Personally, when I have an immigration client and we're exploring immigration options, I really try to not use a program that has a cap for a client, just because, if you follow when these programs open and then when they close, PGP sponsorship, there was an OINP not too long ago. This one as well, they fill up in sometimes 2 minutes. Sometimes the system crashes even because there's so many people applying at the same time. So it is a bit of a difficult situation. When you're working with a client, I don't know, you're going to have to really think about whether or not it's a good idea to take the risk of trying to get in under the cap. And when they open it at midnight or whatever the time is, there's 1,000 RCICs sitting on their computer waiting to press those buttons. And it is something you'll have to think about, I guess, once you start working in immigration. But if you are working in immigration and you want to save the stress of working with a cap, well, the French-speaking programs do not have a cap. So pretty interesting, because if you have a person who qualifies for one of these programs and can meet the language requirement of the French side, which we'll see later on, it's a home run. So really, really amazing news there. If it is a person who is English speaking, the language requirements aren't too difficult, but getting in under that cap, is pretty difficult. And you could see the lower one, the third one, recent international graduates from a Canadian institution, the 40,000 was reached. I don't remember, I think it was within 12 hours or something like that. So it shows you how quick you have to be with those programs. So even before applying for a program, of course, you need to see if the person qualifies for one of these different streams. Now, in an exam context, of course, you certainly do have questions where they will show you the profile of a person and your job is to see if the person qualifies for a certain program. That might be the question. Will these specific pathways be in your exam? It's difficult to say. These are pilots. They are, well, not even pilots really, they're temporary programs. So it is difficult to say. Usually COVID-related temporary programs aren't because they're temporary. So by the time you become an RCIC, they might not exist anymore. But do you still need to know different programs related to immigration? Yes, of course. So with these programs, you do have some general requirements, even though there's 6 different little streams within this. The requirements that are the same across everything really are the same as other economic programs too. I mean, intent to live outside of the province of Quebec. We've talked about this quite a bit. It does come up all the time in immigration law and of course in immigration as an immigration consultant. And of course in exam context it can play a role because it is something that happens in real life quite a bit. You have of course the other requirements residing in Canada. So we've seen this in other programs as well. Employed in Canada at the time, but this can be any employment now, right? So maybe the person worked in healthcare before, and then something changed with the job, so now the person's working at something else, and that's okay for this program. Now you do have a little difference between number 1 and 2. So you can see I've got 1, 2, 4, 5 grouped together, and I've got 3, 6 grouped together. Now for 1, 2, 4, 5 workers in Canada, the language requirements are, well, the same really. So CLB4, and you know that CLB4 is pretty low. For the people who graduate from a Canadian institution, it's CLB5. So I think it's pretty straightforward for that one there. People who graduate from a Canadian institution wouldn't really have a CLB5 anyways, because a CLB6 or 7, or probably CLB6 is the requirement to even enter most Canadian institutions. So I think it's just a way for them to make sure that people can apply for these programs and not have too much difficulty with the language requirement. When you look at the work experience, you can see workers in Canada, it's very similar to CEC, right? And of course, you can see with the recent international graduates, hey, did they graduate recently, basically? and you've got on or after January 1st, 2017. So pretty incredible that they're allowing people to go back this far. Okay, so the difference between the French-speaking programs and the English-speaking programs is really just the language. So a person who is applying for one of the, workers in Canada under healthcare. Well, in terms of language, the person would use the English language, of course. So the results would be IELTS or CELPIP. And then for French, which would mean that the person does not go under the CAP, well, it would be, of course, TCF or TEF. So to speak about employment just a little bit here, you can see they've got 5 points for us. And it is, of course, the person just needs to be employed in Canada. The job has to exist under the NOC. So pretty much every job exists under the NOC, but people sometimes don't meet all the requirements actually of the NOC. Sometimes they have a job title that doesn't match the job description. So in an exam context, of course, be careful for that. Can't be self-employed. I mean, that's similar for a lot of the economic programs as well. If you think of self-employed or proving self-employed work experience for a federal skilled worker, for example, or someone going under these programs, or really most of the other programs, it would be, you can see it as a bit of a conflict of interest for the person to declare their own hours and things like that. Okay, and no volunteer. So we've seen this before as well. Working with authorization. So we've seen this in an exam context quite a bit. If you go through the simulations where a person works illegally, can they use this work experience to qualify for the CEC? No. Can they use it to qualify for any program? No, including these 6 streams. And of course, working with authorization. So the person is on a post-grad work permit. Would he or she qualify for this? Yeah. All right, language requirements. So we've got the CLB5 for the graduates of those programs. We've got all the scores over here, but this is all in your book, in your test day data booklet. So I won't really go on about this because, yeah, we've talked about this so much already in other programs. So CLB5, and that's it. Now, for those students, they do have other requirements, of course. And a helpful trick for this is just to think of it as similar to a post-grad work permit. So what a person needs in order to qualify for a post-grad work permit. You can see the educational requirements are pretty much the same as that, really. So at least 8 months, 2 or more diplomas, 1-year program, 2-year program, etc. Okay, and then for workers, we have a CLB4. So nothing much to say here. If you have your book in front of you, this is pretty easy to work through. For French speakers, of course, it's the French exam. For English speakers, it's the English exam. Now, where it gets even more interesting is when we take a look at the work experience requirements. So of course, the person has to have been authorized to work, etc. But the role in which the person worked is the key, really, to seeing if they qualify for this program or not. So you can see a lot of, health-related jobs here. So we've seen these in other programs as well, right? So when they had the prioritized work permit and LMIA processing, that started in December of 2020, a lot of these jobs were on there as well. When we look at the RNIP, and we see the various medical professions that are needed in these communities. Well, a lot of them are on here. PNPs often have this. And yeah, other programs as well. So there are a lot of opportunities for medically trained professionals. And this one is another one of those. But there is, of course, the other element of the medically trained professional having experience here in Canada. So you've got all these jobs over here. You've got these ones as well. Do you need to memorize all of these? I don't really think so. There's some that are pretty interesting because you have social workers, which I wouldn't have thought are really medically related or health related, but in this context, I guess they are. Psychologists, mental health, of course. I think that's pretty common these days to associate psychologists with mental health. Counselors and that type of thing too. So interesting. And then you have 4412, which is caregivers. So again, if you're working with, I talked about this in the caregivers lesson, but if you're working with caregivers, if you're working with health-related professionals, there are quite a few different options. All right, now workers. So people with work experience in Canada often have, I don't want to say always have immigration opportunities, but sometimes it feels like they always have immigration opportunities because the immigration programs want to keep these people, right? I mean, these are people with Canadian experience who help communities. So you can see all of these different jobs here. This looks a little bit small on the screen because there are so many of these, but they are quite a variety actually of jobs. I mean, you can see over here, you've got elementary school teachers, and then you've got hunters. So there's a variety of jobs in here as well. I don't think you need to really memorize the jobs, but they are what is considered or what was considered essential during, of course, all of those COVID times, which I guess are even happening still. Oh, and more jobs too, farm workers and things like that. Yeah, so there's a lot of these. So how do you apply? Well, it's an online program, just like every other economic program. So there aren't paper-based programs for economic immigration at all anymore. They would go through the portal, make an account, go through the portal, and then, of course, everything would be done through really that portal. For you as the RCIC, you have your representative portal, or you do it kind of in conjunction with your client. They would receive emails with everything really. updates and things like that, as would you. So to conclude, how can this play a role in your upcoming exam? A lot of the temporary programs are simply not on the exam, like I said, because they are temporary, which means that maybe by the time you become a consultant, those programs won't exist. But should you know these programs anyways? And the answer is absolutely yes, because people are going to ask you about them, right? You're going to have clients who come up to you and they'll say, hey, I heard about this program. Do I qualify? And of course, you should have an idea anyways of all programs. In this particular program, that Canadian work experience and that type of thing plays a role in a lot of different programs anyways. So these 6 pathways, can they play a role in your exam? Maybe. I would say the odds are pretty low, but can they play a role in your business? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. Immigration is going to change all the time. You need to be aware of changes because you're going to have people approaching you all the time, and sometimes there will be a change in immigration, and it will, in your mind, you're going to say, wow, this works perfectly with this candidate that has been contacting me. So that's a great time when you're working with a client, there's an immigration change, and then all of a sudden they qualify for a different program or a better program where something's faster or easier. So these change all the time. You should be on it. And again, see all of these changes as opportunities for amazing people to obtain PR and for you to help people become Canadian. All right, so another quick lesson for you just to touch upon this subject. So again, this information is of course in our material. It's in the test day data booklet already, or for the next round, I should say. For all of you, I mean, it's tough keeping up with all of these immigration changes, but keep up with it because that is, of course, life as a consultant is like that. And for the exam as well, I mean, a lot of the topics kind of interlink with each other. So I know you're working hard. I know your time is valuable. I sure appreciate the time you've invested in this lesson, and keep up the good work.